Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It is going well today. Another day to talk about football.
Hey, that's always a good day. We are now 2 nights away from the 2023 NFL Draft. We're recording a bit earlier this week to ensure that both of us, yes, surprise, I'm releasing a mock draft, both of us can release a mock draft before Thursday. As always, thank you to everybody for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on our socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter with the handles at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
Today we have a long awaited trade that just happened, and we have our recent fifth year options exercise for some prominent players. We have some league disciplinary issues that popped up. We also have some TMZ drama on a certain player. We have trade rumors on a top 5, top 3 fantasy running back. We have my rookie tight end rankings. And then we have our mock drafts for you guys tonight. So, quite a show. Let us get kicked off with the Jets and the Packers have officially exercised Aaron Rodgers trade. After several weeks of kicking their feet around, they finally pulled the trigger. Jeff, why don't we talk about what the compensation was in this trade?
So, going to the Jets obviously is Aaron Rodgers, and they also acquired the number 15 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. And in exchange, Green Bay received a decent compensation package because now they have pick 13 in this draft. They also acquired a second round and a fifth round in this draft, and then a conditional second round pick in 2024 that is essentially a first round pick if and when Aaron plays 65% of this year's snaps. Now, Alex, was that too much, not enough, or just right for an aging quarterback?
I think that was too much, personally. I know that they had talked about Green Bay wanted 2 first round picks, and this seems awfully like the actual value is 2 first round picks. So it seems like they got what they were wanting. I know that everyone's like, wait a minute, they gave up a second round pick this year and they gave up a second round pick next year that can be a first. How is that like a first round value for both of them? Well, they switched picks. That's a fourth or third round pick difference between the picks, as well as the additional fifth. To me, it's like getting 2 low first round picks, and that's too much for a really aging quarterback who's on the fence of retiring and had to go into a cave to find his way back into the league for another year, pay him $60 million and hope that he's going to put in his best effort. It's a lot, especially since they're the only ones that were interested in him as far as we know. So it seems like they gave up too much. They destroyed their trade leverage by openly talking about, oh, he's going to be here, oh, he's going to be here. So it's good for the Packers. They salvaged something from Aaron Rodgers, and they get to see if Love's any good. And if Love's not good, guess what? They're going to be picking at the top of a quarterback loaded draft next year. So I can't see this being anything but a win for the Packers. And for this to be a win for the Jets, they have to win a Super Bowl like immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I hear everything that you're saying. The Jets are very desperate to get the quarterback position correct, and it does come through with the compensation that they are desperate for that. The one thing that we don't exactly know yet is how much Spotrac or Spotrac, however you want to pronounce it, they have the cap hit for the Jets at $15.7 million. So to me, that tells me that Green Bay is actually retaining a huge chunk of the salary too.
Well, what the Jets did was they converted most of his salary into a bonus, and that lowered his cap hit for this year. I don't know if
Okay.
that's fully in spot track yet, but that's the blurb that I saw. I do think the
Definitely.
Jets have one thing going for them, and that's Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets after Brett Favre did that. He is going to want to prove that he can do something that Brett Favre couldn't do there. So he might actually put full effort to try to win a Super Bowl and be like, "Look, I'm better than Brett Favre." That's the one positive for the Jets there that I can see.
Absolutely. So it'll be interesting when all of the contract details do roll out and how much Green Bay is actually on the hook for a dead cap that they leave behind. I do think that all goes into the compensation. Green Bay is going to be like, why are we going to trade away a player if he's going to be a detriment to our cap for anything less than you said essentially 2 first rounds. Now, the way that they got to the 2 lower 1st round picks, they kind of did it by like inching in areas. So like they inched up 2 picks, they got a 5th, they got a conditional 2nd right now that could become a 1st. So that's another inch. And it's just, it was a lot of moving parts, it looked like, for this. I do think Aaron going to the Jets here is going to be really helpful for the Jets. I don't know, though, if they are any better than the 3rd best team in the AFC East, though. When you have Josh Allen and the Bills and you have Tua and McDaniel leading the Dolphins charge. What are your thoughts there?
It's interesting. I think that you could put them in the conversation of top two, but I don't know which one you'd remove. So I would mostly agree with you. I know a lot of people want to make it seem like the Jets are now a Super Bowl contender over these other two, but all three of them are very good. They're better than they were last year. So
Yeah, absolutely not a Super Bowl contender. They are better at quarterback than last year. There probably will be a slight regression in defense because their defense was great last year, and there's probably going to be some regression to the mean there. But they also had the worst quarterback play last year, and that will improve for sure this year. It'll be interesting to see what Aaron does as far as distributing the football. I know there's Garrett Wilson there, there's Lazard's there. He still has Corey Davis. There's rumors of Hopkins still going there, and I don't know if this changes Hopkins' mind because I know he said he only wanted to be a Bill or a Chief. I don't know if this changes his mind now that Aaron's there to be able to throw him the football. Brees Hall kind of gets an uptick on this. Like, I think, and might be a bold call, but I do think that Aaron's going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year. I think he's going to return to a little bit of his prominence, and I do think the added weapons is really going to help him. Going to a younger team is going to really help him, and I think the change of environment is really going to help him. Now, we've talked about this before offline, but I do believe that Aaron's talk about retirement is much to do about nothing other than to give him an unofficial no trade clause because no one's going to trade for a quarterback that they think is going to retire. And as long as you have that threat that you've been constantly putting out there into the media, then it's at least it's a credible threat if and when you get traded to a team that you don't want to be a part of. So Aaron's kind of controlling his own destiny by continuously doing this and taking these steps. Maybe the Packers were like, no, we won't put a no trade clause into your contract. So this was his way of being like, well, if you won't give me a no trade clause, I'll make one myself. I never thought Aaron was going to walk away from $50 to $60 million this year. And I don't know what the structure of his contract looks like going forward, but if he has a similar structure for next year, I can't see him walking away from 50 to 60 million next year.
yeah, I think he's probably going to play 2 years, but he is awfully old for a quarterback. So
Hey, watch yourself. Um, moving on to 5th year options of the younger quarterbacks, we have Joe Burrow. His 5th year option was activated. It may or may not matter in the next couple of weeks or next couple of months with Joe Burrow's extension due soon. Also, another 5th year option was Justin Jefferson. and his may not matter either because I see him also being an extension candidate sometime in the future. These two are superstars, and you don't really let your superstars play out their fourth year, their fifth year without actually paying them. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I feel like these were no-brainers. Am I right on
Yeah.
that?
They're absolutely no-brainers, and these guys will be getting paid very soon.
Absolutely. The only interesting thing here is if Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, or Lamar Jackson go first, second, or third. Like, that'll be really interesting because I do think that the last person will get paid the most, and that's just the way that it goes. But sometimes if you hold out too long, you turn into a Lamar situation. So, so there's like a fine line of holding out and like asking for the extra buck. I think Jalen Hurts would know that it's probably like a good thing for him to have his contract wrapped up, not worrying about it now. Team's not worrying about it. They can focus in a different direction and to try to win that championship, which is actually probably something that they'll win in the next couple of years.
Yep, I agree with that. Okay, so I know a lot of you might already have heard this, but we had some gambling issues with the Detroit Lions locker room this past week, and several players were suspended for the entire year for gambling on NFL games. One of the most prominent ones was suspended for 6 weeks because he gambled on a college game in an NFL facility, and that's Jamison Williams. It's not very ideal for him since he just was out last year on an injury. So now people who bought him in Dynasty are holding on to him like, man, this guy just won't ever play. So, Jeff, what do you think is going to happen with him? Do you think he's still worth keeping on to, buying low, selling? What do you think about this situation?
So the first thing for 2023, I think the 6 weeks off could really benefit him because by the time he does enter the NFL around week 7, there's going to be a lot of he's going to be fully healthy this go around. So there's not going to be any like dipping his toe into the water or anything like that that happened last year. He's going to enter full he should enter fully healthy. I should put it that way because obviously things happen in practice and training and stuff like that, but he should enter fully healthy week 7 or their 7th game of the year if they have a bye before then. And that would be a huge uplift because others are banged up and you never know what other injuries are going around. Also, while there's risk, this is the type of player I would reach out to the Jamison Williams owner in dynasty leagues to see if there's a discount for him. So if you could buy him like 80, 85 cents on the dollar, I would do it 100%. And the reason why there might be a discount is because, as you had mentioned, he had the torn ACL last year that kind of really limited his snaps and limited his production last year. Now, this suspension, dynasty owners might be fed up with tying up a roster spot with him and might be the perfect time to pounce on a round 1 pick in 2022. And I think a lot of folks forget about that. And I think he was the first wide receiver off the board in 2022, if I'm not wrong.
I think in a lot of leagues he definitely was. And you might be able to get him cheaper than 85 cents on the dollar, but it really just depends.
I like a bargain. So, moving on to other news around the league, there was an article that came out with the title Odell Beckham Jr. named in assault investigation. Now, the reason why we're bringing this up is not because we believe that Odell Beckham did something wrong at this point, but we're bringing it up just so viewers and listeners can be aware that headlines can be very misleading. We would recommend opening up any articles, anything like that, because inside of this article, they contacted the owner, and there is no evidence of this happening on video from exactly where the person said the assault happened. This appears to be much to do about nothing, but be careful being a headline reader and assuming you know the entire article at that point. Speaking of being careful, this last weekend, Derrick Henry trade rumors ran rampant. Now, while it remains to be seen whether this actually happens or not, it appears the rumors were much to do about nothing. And be careful who you follow on social media, and always try to get a second source before believing something. And I know this happens to us all the time, and now there are certain social media platforms that are unverifying people that are trusted sources, and you get a lot of fake accounts based around that now. So just be really careful of the news that you take in from sources.
Well, I just think it's interesting because the guy who put it out there in the first place has the same agent as Derrick Henry, is in the media. He's a former player. Derrick Henry has 1 year left of his contract. And are the Titans, who are a sinking ship, going to want to pay him a big contract? It makes sense that they would want to try to shop Derrick Henry because I don't see them paying him long term to stay. Everyone's looking at the Eagles as a potential place for Bijan to go in the draft. So they think they just need a power runner left. That's the only thing that's missing on their at least running back room. So Derrick Henry makes a lot of sense in that regard. They traded with the Titans for AJ Brown. All of that was building into it, but there's been nothing behind it. There's nothing of substance behind it. It's all of these little things that point to maybe this being true, but everything's come back as denying everything, saying this is a fake rumor. It's just a guy in the media who had a thought and blasted it as if it was true, and people ran with it.
Yeah, and it always makes me look twice at those people. Like, I get it, you're trying to be first, but like what trust did you break in that trying to be first area? Like, you might have had confidential information that you're bursting out into everybody here, and now no one's going to trust you going forward on either side, because now you've leaked information, and now you've leaked it too early, so now the media is like, no, this isn't happening. But if you're the Eagles looking for that running back, why not just draft Bijan Robinson, cheaper, younger, and more explosive probably at this point?
Well, cheaper money wise, but not cheaper draft compensation wise. So, I mean, it's which one you value more as an organization. But we can move on to our next topic, which is my top tight ends. Since I did 12 wide receivers, I'm doing 8 tight ends just to make sure there's 20 pass catchers altogether. This is a very, very, very talented tight end group. Any of these guys could put up big numbers in the fantasy realm. But let's start with number 8 here, and that is Luke Schoonmaker from Michigan. He's the oldest one of this group at 25. He is a prototypical size for a tight end in the NFL. So he stands at 6'5", 250 pounds. He's an impressive athlete. He's got excellent agility with his 3-cone measuring in the 95th percentile, as well as elite explosion with a 97th percentile broad jump. He surprisingly has speed on his deep routes for such a large frame. He ran a 4.6340. He has good short area footwork with quickness, and he is a very precise route runner. He has really soft hands as well. He uses good lotion, I guess. Just a little joke for you. Just make sure you're still listening. The cons are he doesn't really display a lot of power as a run blocker. He has a limited route tree. He's a little bit stiff when he's running routes. I think his ball skills are just about average, and he doesn't quite fight for a ball when it's contested. And he's a little bit of an overaged prospect. He'll be 25 as a rookie. I know that we frown on overaged prospects in general, but sometimes they can work out. I think pro comps, he's kind of like a Dawson Knox. He's kind of like a taller, older Aaron Hernandez in some ways too, without killing a guy or two. So we don't have to worry about that aspect. But ultimately, I think, in my opinion, he's a second, third round prospect. He could go in the fourth. He is someone that a lot of teams are going to target once these tight ends start running in the draft. My next guy is Tucker Kraft, the tight end out of South Dakota State. He's 22. He's also the prototypical size, 6'5", 254 pounds. He was a very productive player in college in 2021. He had 65 catches, 770 yards for about 12 yards per catch, 6 touchdowns. And in 2022, he had an injury, so he didn't play very much. He is a very super versatile player. He can line up in line, outside, in the slot. It's very rare for a tight end to have those kinds of skills. He is excellent both as a run and a pass blocker. He has good strength and effort to run through arm tackles. He has much more overall quickness than his 4.69 would suggest. My cons for him is he has a limited route tree. He isn't much of a burner and he'll struggle making sharp cuts. And he has concentration drops due to turning and running before securing the ball. I think Tucker Kraft, his pro comp for me is like a Pat Fryermuth, who is someone I'm quite fond of when it comes to fantasy. I think he's also going to be about a second or third round prospect like the previous one, Schoonmaker. I think he potentially could go in the fourth. It just depends on how many teams need a very productive pass catching tight end. My number 6 is Luke Musgrave. He's someone some people have a lot higher. He's a tight end out of Oregon State. He's 22. He's another one of these big guys. He's 6'6", 255 pounds. He also is an NFL bloodline player. His uncle was a pro quarterback in the 90s. A very big fan of any player who is a bloodline player. He is a very explosive athlete. His vertical was 36.5 inches. His broad jump was 10 feet 1 inch and 3/4. And he clocked in a 4:51.40 time and did a 4:21 pro agility time. All terrific numbers for a tight end of his size. He combines good speed with his size. He's a good catch and run threat. He runs precise routes with mostly crisp cuts. He looks great in contested catch situations, and he has soft, reliable hands. The problems that I have with him is he lacks college production. His 2020 was limited due to all the COVID stuff, and his 2022 was impacted by a serious knee injury, which limited him to just 2 games. He needs a lot of work as a pass blocker, and he does not create the kind of separation you'd hope given that fast 40 time. My pro comp for him is a Dallas Goddard, and I think that Musgrave will probably go in the second to third round. I think some teams really like him. So I would guess the second round is where he might go. I think a lot of these tight ends that we're coming to might be second or first round prospects, depending on how the board falls. My next tight end is Darnell Washington, the tight end out of Georgia. He is the youngest. He's 21. His pros is he is huge, 6'7", 270 pounds. He's an elite blocker and has the power to drive with the blocking ability of a tackle. So I actually have a thought that if he doesn't work out as a tight end, he might get moved over to tackle and have potentially a Hall of Fame career as a tackle. He has an elite catch radius because of his enormous size. He's a powerful open field runner with agility. He's got long arms that allow him to play even bigger than his size, and he's very good in contested catch situations. The reason why I don't have him much higher is Washington creates very little separation. He looks slower than his 4:64.40 time. He has very limited receiving experience. He wasn't targeted that much in college, despite being a very large and good receiving option to have on your team. He leaves a lot desired as a receiver. He could end up ultimately, like I said, being an offensive tackle instead of a tight end if he doesn't work out in that spot. My pro comps for him is he's somewhere between like a Mercedes Lewis and a Gronk. He's not as quick as Gronk. He's not as good of a receiver as Gronk. He's more of a blocking guy that does short routes and can truck people. I think that teams might be enamored with his size and his upside. I have him as a second round prospect. He's one of the guys that's talked about going at the end of the first round. So there's a lot of teams out there that like him. My number 4 tight end is Sam Laporta, the tight end out of Iowa. He's 22. He's not as large as the others in his class, but still a good size at 6'3", 245 pounds. that used to be considered big. Now there's a lot more big boys out there. He had good production as a tight end with 106 catches over his last 2 seasons in college for 1,260 yards and 4 touchdowns. He runs wide receiver routes in addition to tight end routes. He's a very reliable target on passing downs and rarely drops a pass. He uses his length and athleticism well to catch off target passes. He's got a great athletic build for a tight end and ran a 4.59 time, and he's great after the catch. My cons for him is he needs to work as a blocker. A lot of these guys do. He's very limited in the run game, and he only contributes as a receiver. In my opinion, I think he's very similar to a Hayden Hurst type, and he has the potential of a George Kittle type tight end, in my opinion. I think he's most likely going to go in the second round. He may slip to the third, but I don't think he's one of these guys that goes in the first round. I don't think teams like him that much, but there is a lot of speculation circling him and a lot of interest. My third tight end is Zach Kuntz, the tight end out of Old Dominion. He is 23. He's supersized at 6'8" and 1/4. He's 251 pounds, and he has an eye-popping blend of great size and athleticism. This offseason, he clocked a 4.57 time to go with a 40-inch vertical and a 10-foot, 8-inch broad jump. He's got good quickness off the snap with a quick, clean release and enough speed to go deep. He is a lean athlete with obvious upside. He's got soft hands and flashes the ability to make the outstanding catch. He's got good ball tracking abilities. He is as dangerous in catch and run situations as Kuntz is taking the top off of defense. My cons for him is he's not a good blocker. He's essentially a 6'8" receiver. He's not as good at contested catches as his size would indicate. I think sometimes a smaller defensive back can poke the ball out, which is something he needs to work on. And his playing speed appears a little bit slower than that 40 time. But overall, I think he is a very good tight end. In some ways, he is very similar to a Mike Gesicki. I think he has greater potential than Gesicki does. I think I like him a lot more than some of these other analysts out there who typically have him further down on their own top lists. I have him as a second round prospect. I can understand someone potentially going lower on him. I just think he's too tantalizing to pass the second round, in my opinion. My number 2 prospect is Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame. He's 21. That may surprise people that he's not my number 1, but there's a lot to like about him. I just think my top 2 are very close, and I like my top 1 a little bit better. But Michael Mayer, he's not as large as the others in this class, but he is 6'4" and 249 pounds. A lot of these guys are very close. He was very productive in college with 138 catches, 1,649 yards, and 16 touchdowns over 2 seasons. He's good against the press. Very few of these guys are good against the press. He's a smooth route runner. He's got good burst off the snap. He's got the softest hands in this class. He's got the most complete set of receiving tools out of this class. He's one of the better blockers in this class. And I think he's the most complete all around tight end and a good red zone target. My issues with him is he lacks overall athleticism compared to the rest of the class. He had a slow 4.7 and it shows on tape. He's got smaller hands than the rest of my top tight ends at 9.5 inches, and his playing strength doesn't show as well as his workout numbers. However, I have a very elite tight end that I would pro comp him to, and I'm not the only one, and that's Jason Witten, the former Cowboy. I think he's going to be a phenomenal tight end in this league. I don't think he's going to get huge chunks of plays, but he's going to be a very reliable receiving target. Personally, I see him going in the high 2s, but there's a lot of teams that might take him in the low 1s in this draft. He has a lot of interest around the league as far as I can discern. My number 1 tight end is Dalton Kincaid out of Utah. He's 23. He's got good size at 6'4", 246 pounds. He was also productive in college with 106 catches, 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns over 2 years. He's a former basketball player, which is very promising when it comes to tight ends and wide receivers. He tracks the ball well on intermediate routes and is rarely caught out of position. He is explosive off the line and has a better playing speed than his 40 time suggests. And he's able to go deep. He's a quick, lean athlete that can be better as a pro. He runs perfect routes and has an impressive catch radius. He has soft hands. He has decent strength and effort to run through arm tackles. My cons for him is he's more of a receiver only. He is a poor blocker, so that's something he needs to improve upon to get more playing time and consistent playing time. He's played most of his snaps from the slot, which will be an adjustment for him going forward. And he's mostly a short intermediate route kind of receiver in the tight end position. My pro comps for him are Zach Ertz, potentially Mark Andrews type player. So I think he has a lot to contribute and live up to. And I also see him going around the same range as Mayer, and that is high twos, low ones. Both of these guys have a lot of interest around the league. I think all of these guys can contribute in fantasy, especially once we find out who drafts them and what their situations look like. So, Jeff, any surprises here? Any guys that you really like? Anyone that you didn't know about that now you're going to look into?
So it is interesting to see that a lot of tight ends have soft hands, as you had mentioned earlier.
It's a good
That,
class. It's a very good class.
yep, absolutely. And some of them are good against the press, which I don't know what the press did to them, but they got to be good against it. Oh, you didn't mean the media press. You meant against press defense. Got it.
Oh no, you're 100% right. They hired a publicist who talked him up against the press.
No, there was a few people that stuck out, like Musgrave, that I didn't really get a chance to look into yet, especially with the high end comp being Dallas Goddard. Obviously, he's a very productive tight end, and he's usually like a middle tight end one. So I think that's a big deal. I think all of these could contribute going in. As you were saying, Mayer's a really good blocker, so he might be used to block earlier. Kincaid is not a good blocker, so he might be used to receive earlier, so he might be a better fantasy tight end early on. We'll see. Landing spots kind of will dictate that. And anything else you want to say before we wrap up the position ranks for 2023?
No, just that I really like all of these tight ends, and I don't necessarily think you can go wrong with one of them. It's just going to depend where their landing spots are, and you might completely rearrange this list based on the landing spot. This is just going into the draft.
All right. Speaking of going into the draft, we have one final each mock draft. So we each have a mock draft here. Pretty big deal because I know that you've made some changes from the last mock draft, some additional trades, even reversed some trades, like got rid of some trades in here.
Just trying to respond to the latest buzz.
How are you feeling about this mock draft?
Oh, I think there's a good chance that 75% of it's wrong, but most mock drafts are mostly wrong anyway. It's just about finding the spots that you were right about that no one else caught. But we try to do as close as we can, and who knows? I mean, it might be fairly good.
Right. And I think that we still need to have answered what is harder, the March Madness bracket, getting it perfect, or getting a perfect mock draft? That's a good question.
I feel like mock drafts are harder. I know it's less picks, but I think there's a lot more players out there. I don't know. Trades can happen
Absolutely.
too, all this other stuff.
All right. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to announce the team. We're going to announce the pick, actually, because there may be some trades in here that we announce along the way. I'm going to let Alex go ahead first, announce his player. I'm going to announce my player. If they're the same, we'll talk about them a little bit. If they're different, we'll talk about them a little bit more. Alex, the first team on the clock is the Carolina Panthers. Who do you have going to the Carolina Panthers?
So I know initially the rumors were that CJ Stroud was the guy. And I know lately people are trying to push Levis as the number one, but I have Bryce Young still. I think that makes the most sense. He's the most sure guy. He's the one that owners like more. So I still have Bryce Young, the quarterback out of Alabama.
I also have Bryce Young at the number 1 pick, and I know that there's rumors going around that they're considering Will Levis with the 1 pick. So I think that's a smokescreen. I think that they've locked in Bryce Young weeks ago, and I think that they've formalized it today with the entire team of the coaching staff and front office. So moving on to the Houston Texans. Who do you have going number 2?
So no one knows what the Texans are doing at this point, but the current feeling is that they are not going to take a quarterback at number 2. So I have the best defensive player here. They could go a different route, but I have Will Anderson, the defensive end out of Alabama. I know they're also interested in Tyree Wilson, the defensive end out of Texas Tech. So it could be either of those guys. I have Will Anderson though.
And I also have Will Anderson going to them, but I do agree that this is interesting where the draft kind of could go in multiple different directions. So this is a position that Houston could trade out if another team wants a quarterback bad enough. Houston could go quarterback themselves. They could go edge. It'll just be an interesting area here for Houston, and it
So
kind of
yeah, let's
breaks
just
out.
talk about real quick the different options that they can actually do. So if they stay at this spot and pick defense, it's Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, both edge. If they pick quarterback, it's CJ Stroud, Will Levis. Maybe if they're going upside, go Anthony Richardson. So that's already 5 options. Plus, there's a trade down. If any team likes one of those quarterbacks a lot and wants to trade up, Houston is more than willing to listen and trade down because it seems like they're locked into just one guy, and that's Bryce Young, and anyone else is a fallback option. It makes more sense to me that no one really is going to want to trade up, and they'll let Houston take whoever they think the best available is, which will be an edge. And we both came to that same conclusion, probably Will Anderson.
Yeah, I think he's the best in this year's draft. But moving on to number 3 with Arizona Cardinals on the clock. Who do you have going there?
They've been rumored to like Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson. They've been rumored to like Christian Gonzalez a lot, Devon Witherspoon. So ultimately, they want to trade down. I don't know if anyone's going to offer what it takes to get up there. I know they've been desperately trying to get people to trade up. I don't think it's going to happen. So I think they'll take the best edge that's left, and that's Tyree Wilson, the defensive end out of Texas Tech.
And I also have the same with the Cardinals. So I think we're in consensus for the first 3 picks. And as you were saying, between him and Wilson and Anderson, it just shows that there's not that big of a gap between the two if they're going to go 2 and 3. Fills a need because JJ Watt's now gone. And I think the only way Arizona competes over the next couple of years is if they really beef up their defense. So, I mean, this would be a huge step to doing that. Indianapolis Colts are on the clock at 4. Who do you have going there?
I think they're laser locked into Will Levis, the quarterback out of Kentucky. They could also be interested in Stroud, the quarterback out of Ohio State. I know a lot of other analysts are floating out Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida, but I think it ultimately comes down to Will Levis. So that's who I have for them.
And I also have Will Levis only because of how much smoke is coming from there right now. It just feels like it's really picked up and hasn't really backed off at all. So it feels like the right move. It does, and I believe that is actually what is going to happen Thursday night. So that's all of our agreements. We're gonna agree with this whole thing, are we not, Alex?
No, there's no way. But
You copied mine.
the top four, we agree with 100%.
So we have
Outside of that, this is where it starts to get crazy. So let's talk about our drafts. Jeff's gonna have the more logical one, and I'm gonna have the more fringe conspiracy theorist kind of draft from here on out. Basically, at number 5, The Seahawks have gone to every of the top quarterbacks pro days. They've had their whole squad with them. They've taken pictures with these quarterbacks. They've gone to dinner with them. Pete Carroll is on the record of saying that he doesn't know when he's going to pick this high again, and he might be looking at quarterback. I think that Geno Smith, the way his contract is structured, it's very easy to get out of, and he's a perfect placeholder kind of mentor quarterback that will help the team win now for a year or two while they groom the next guy. So I think this is the perfect spot for the Seahawks to take a quarterback. And I have it being Anthony Richardson because I think he would be the kind of project guy that you would sit for a year or two and work out all of his kinks and then take over. And he has huge potential. So I have the Seahawks going quarterback. And Jeff, I know you completely disagree with me, so go ahead and say who your guy is and then say why you think I'm wrong and you're going with your choice.
Wow, I did not expect Anthony Richardson this early. Very raw talent that is boom or bust, and that is a risky number 5 pick. With my 5th pick with Seattle, I have them taking Jalen Carter, who is risky for other reasons, but one of them is not his talent. And I do believe that Seattle is going to look to start to reconstruct a Legion of Boom of sorts. And I know a lot of those came from later round picks, but there were some first round picks in that Legion of Boom. And Jalen Carter is a guy that could disrupt the middle. And I know he had a bad pro day. I know that he had some off the field issues, but Pete Carroll in the past has not shied away from controversial talent and turned them into all pros. And it just seems like a Pete Carroll pick right there at number 5.
I definitely think both of these guys are in contention for their board. I really do think that they are considering Jalen Carter as well. I just don't know if they're as into him as a lot of people would like to believe. I think Jalen Carter is kind of slipping down boards just a little bit. I don't think he's off everyone's board, but I do think people have slid him down because in his collegiate career he struggled down the stretch. Then he didn't do very great with his pro day, which is concerning because you would think your own pro day you would do well, and the off the field issues I think has gotten to him a lot as well. So someone's going to jump at his upside and his talent and think that they can get him through his struggles. It could very well be the Seahawks. I also think that they could go for Anthony Richardson. I think this team likes to work with projects and maximize their potential.
Absolutely. And Jalen Carter would be that project and maximizing his potential.
Anthony Richardson. All right. All right. At number 6 with the Detroit Lions. This is another deviation pick that I don't think a lot of people have. And I think that Jared Goff has 2 years left on his deal. I don't think he's a quarterback that you want to extend for a long period of time. When else would you have a better chance to take a quarterback than right now? It's a similar situation with the Seahawks. And CJ Stroud, someone who is in contention for the number 1 overall pick and the number 2 overall pick, is there at 6 and you didn't have to trade up. I think the Lions would jump at this scenario to draft CJ Stroud as the quarterback behind Goff, and maybe they could move on with Goff the following season, his last year, 2024, under his contract. So I think this is something that could very well happen. I also think one of the other guys that we mentioned, Jalen Carter, would be in contention. And Jeff, I know you have another pick. Why don't you say what your pick is and then tell me how wrong I am about mine?
Wrong. No, I'm just much lower on the quarterbacks than you are this year. And I think that as we've looked in the past years, that quarterbacks are always overrated, overdrafted. And I think this is just another case of that. So I went in a completely different direction and I take my top cornerback off the board, and that's Christian Gonzalez. And I do believe that that fits a need and really rebuilds that defense of Detroit because it wasn't Detroit's offense that held them back last year. It was their defense. They definitely put up a lot of points. They just need to keep points off the board. And this is why I have them going a defensive route here.
I think that's within the realm of possibility. If I didn't put a quarterback there, I 100% would have put a corner, unless Jalen Carter was available, and then I'd consider Jalen Carter at 6 as well. So I think that very well could happen. My personal opinion is if I went corner for the Lions, I would go Witherspoon, who I like a little bit more than Gonzalez. But Gonzalez is in the top two, top one consideration for a lot of people out there as a number one corner or number two corner in this draft. So that's a very good, very reasonable pick for the Lions. I like to go the crazier route, and I like to have 4 quarterbacks in the top 6 picks. So
Has that ever happened before?
there was almost 4 back to back. There was 3 back to back, and then one that went at 11 instead of 10. So there's almost 4 in the top 10.
So this would be the first time.
Hey, there has to be a first for everything, right? Moving forward to the Raiders at number 7. They have a lot of needs. I know a lot of people have them potentially trading up higher for a quarterback, but I just think they have so many needs, it wouldn't make sense. One of the needs that I have for them is in their secondary. They are woefully weak there. So I have them taking Devon Witherspoon, the cornerback out of Illinois, at that spot. Jeff, what do you have in your mock, and what do you think of Devon Witherspoon there?
So with my pick here at number 7, I have Peter Skoronski, offensive tackle, because the Raiders are going to need to keep Jimmy Garoppolo upright. And it is a position of need, and they've really got to figure out this offense that wasn't that great last year. Like, they had spurts where they had the best receiver in football, but outside of that, and they had the best running back in football. That's kind of interesting. If you put that all together and you think of how much their offense still sputtered with those two, best receiver and the best running back last year, it's kind of puzzling why their offense sputtered, and adding to the offensive line is never a bad move here. This will help Jacobs as he signs his franchise tender, and it will also help keep Jimmy upright. And as far as Witherspoon, I know that there's a huge debate whether it's going to be Christian Gonzalez or Witherspoon first. And I think it's going to come down to each individual team's board, because it doesn't sound like there is a consensus right now. If they don't go in the path of offensive tackle, they could move into the path of cornerback. I do see that as a logical move for them.
I know you have Gonzalez as your number one corner, and I have Witherspoon as mine. So that will be interesting between us who ends up going first in the draft. I have Skoronski as more of a guard just because he's got a little bit short arms. I think some teams think he can still play tackle, but I have him predominantly as a guard. But he is a very, very safe, good pick. So I think the Raiders could easily go offensive line. It makes sense that corner and offensive line would be their two highest needs at this point, in my opinion.
Agreed. So I think there was nothing too crazy there. So we can move on to the next one here with the number 8 pick. Who do you have the Atlanta Falcons taking?
So I have the Atlanta Falcons sitting here thinking there's a lot of needs that we have. We can still take best available. There's a lot of guys that we like. Jalen Carter is still on the board, and I have the Eagles wanting to trade up in front of the Bears, snipe them, and take Jalen Carter, which is a position of need for them at defensive tackle. So the Eagles are trading up from 10 to 8 with the Falcons. Doesn't really hurt the Falcons at all. They get to pick up extra picks. The Eagles get to ensure that they get the best defensive tackle in this class in front of the Bears, who really like him. So I have the Eagles taking Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia, with the Falcons pick.
So that's interesting to see a trade. I have the Falcons keeping their pick, and I have them going in a different direction to kind of start shoring up their defensive line, and they're going to take edge rusher Nolan Smith from Georgia. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think edge is a big area of need for them.
So I like Nolan Smith. I know that 8 is probably the highest that he would go. I think he might be between the 10 and 20 range is more where I see him falling, but he's a very good prospect. He is probably the best of the edges on run stopping. A lot of these guys can't set the edge very well and are just more of pass rushers, pure pass rushers. So I think he's actually pretty good as a well-rounded guy. He may not excite people as much, but I think he's a really good edge position. So they can't go wrong there. I know they spent a little bit on their defense in free agency, and it wouldn't hurt them to bring in another young piece on top of that.
All right. I completely agree with that. We will see which direction the Falcons go there because I think this whole draft has a whole bunch. I think there's a lot of roads that people could take because I don't know if there's those no brainer picks that there have been in previous years. So I think there's directions that teams can go. What direction do you have the Bears going with the number 9 pick?
So with my draft having the Eagles came in and took Jalen Carter in front of them. So the Bears are now looking at their board and like, okay, our next need is offensive tackle. There's a few offensive tackles that we like. Maybe we should trade down. And I have the Steelers who have been rumored to have been reaching out to the Bears about moving up from 17 to 9 to take a player that we don't know who the player was. I believe it's an offensive tackle because that's a position of need for them to make Najee Harris more effective, to make Pickett a little bit more secure so he can throw to those receivers now that he has 3 decent receivers to throw to, supposedly, on the roster. So, offensive tackle makes sense for that offense. I know they want to do trenches all together, so defensive tackle and offensive tackle, but I don't think that there's someone on defense right here. So offensive tackle is what I have them going up for. Paris Johnson Jr. He's a tackle from Ohio State. He is very polished. I think the Steelers would want to get him and add him to their line.
Another trade. So it does seem like there's going to be a few trades that go on during this here. Since you had the Steelers pick, let's go back to the Bears, and I have the Bears taking Paris Johnson here to
So we
protect
have,
Justin Fields. We have the same person,
yep,
but different team.
I think he goes in the top 10 most likely. So I think nine's a good spot.
Yeah, and it really is an area of need for the Bears, and they really need to do everything possible to keep Justin Fields up, healthy, because they've really got to figure out what he is. There's no other time than now to figure out what Justin Fields is and if he's going to be the quarterback of the future.
Yeah.
No better way than
All
to
right.
protect him.
Yeah. And next, I have the Falcons picking at the Eagles spot as part of that trade that I mentioned earlier. And I have them taking Peter Skoronski, who is most likely going to be a guard for them. They're rumored to be very much enamored with him. So I think moving down and still being able to get him is quite a coup for them. So I think that is a very good value, and I really like it for them. Jeff, who do you have the Eagles taking at 10?
So I have the Philadelphia Eagles selecting Lukas Van Ness, edge from Iowa.
I like him. He, in some ways, reminds me of JJ Watt a little bit. He's a little stiff, but he is a hard worker. He's one of those motor guys that I really like.
Yeah, and it fills a need.
Fills a need, and I think he probably goes from the 10 to 15 range, somewhere in there is what I would guess. I'm sure he could fall a little bit lower than that, but I really like him a lot.
So moving forward in the 11th slot, who do you have picking here?
So I have the Titans at 11. They were unsuccessful, if they even tried, to trade up into the top 10 or top 5 to take a quarterback. They desperately need talent on the offense. just to see what they have. And I have them going Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is the best wide receiver in this class, in my opinion, at least the safest. And he's out of Ohio State. So he complements Treylon Burks, who they already have. Treylon Burks is more of an X receiver type. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a slot receiver who can play outside, and I think he's elite as a slot receiver and potentially very good on the outside. So I think he and Burks would be a good complement to each other, and that could help Ryan Tannehill. It could help Malik Willis if they're still willing to work with him, or it could help another quarterback if they take a different quarterback later in the draft. Jeff, who do you have, and what do you think of Jackson Smith-Njigba for the Titans?
I was so close to pulling the trigger on that because my thought was to get two receivers in place, get a tight end in place because they do have a young tight end as well. Kind of see what happens to Derrick Henry this year. Kind of a walk in place next year for a young quarterback because I do think that they hold off until next year at quarterback. They did try the Malik Willis experiment, and that didn't work out. There were reports today that they had soured on Malik, and that was proven by the fact that they switched to Dobbs really quickly. It was between two players, and I went with Miles Murphy, edge from Clemson. I think that Vrabel building up a defense just made more sense to me in this pick than picking a wide receiver in this class right now. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's pretty solid. I think that's just as good. So Vrabel's the defensive mind. He'll want a defensive pick, but I also like Jackson Smith-Njigba. I mean, they're one of those teams right now. I don't know what they're gonna do, and it sounds like every veteran on their team is for sale. Their safety bird. They tried to get a pay cut. He might be on the block. Henry's on the last year of his deal. He might be on the block. Ryan Tannehill might be on the block. I don't know if they're retooling, rebuilding, tearing everything down, going to go for a playoff run. I have no idea where they are right now. So it'll be interesting to see what they do on draft day.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, we have a team that is up for the second time. We have the Houston Texans picking at number 12.
There's no quarterbacks available on mine right now. So defensive coach. I don't think they're sold on any of these quarterbacks anyway. So I think they're going to build the defense up. They already have Stingley from last year, who they got in the top five. They have two really good safeties now. So I think they need to build on the other side, so the other corner position. And I have them taking the best available corner, who is your top corner, Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback out of Oregon, at 12. So I think he and Stingley would be a really good pair and would be an elite secondary for the Texans, especially considering they got a pass rusher at number 2.
So I have them going in a different direction. They are going to take Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He is going to help shore up their receiver corpse, and he is going to play opposite of Mechie. I think Robert Woods plays in the slot, and Woods moves on after 1 year. So that is kind of my vision there. And then they would have a spot where a rookie quarterback would walk in there and be able to compete in 2024 when there's actually better rookie quarterbacks. Then, what are your thoughts with that, JSN?
So I wouldn't hate it. I would very much like him for the Texans. He's one of my comps to him when we were doing that segment, when we were doing the wide receiver segment, is he's a Julian Edelman type. Well, they have a lot of Patriots former front office people. So I could easily see them being like, whoa, he's Julian Edelman. Let's bring him over to our team. I just think maybe just some caution that they have Mechie, who's coming back, who was out all last year with an illness. They have Nico Collins, who's going into, I think, his third season. They have Robert Woods now. So I don't know if it's a priority. It seems like a luxury. He's a really good player. I would love to have him. I don't know if that's the direction they go. I can also see him going to the Titans, the pick before that I had, because it's another Patriots connection. I think the Patriots at 14 could be a good spot. The Packers at 13 could be a good spot. Could be one of the reasons why they pressured the Jets to swap those picks to get in front of the Patriots to get someone like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So this whole 11 to 14 or maybe even further down, I can see JSN go in any of these spots. So I think he's a good value. I think he's a good potential pick as well. All right. And with the 13th pick in this draft now, because of that swap with the Jets as part of the Aaron Rodgers trade, the Packers are picking. And I have them picking someone who you had go 10 and who I almost put for the Texans at 12, Lukas Van Ness, the edge out of Iowa. They have been sorely missing a consistent edge rusher. He is a Midwest guy. I think he'd fit in very well with the Packers. I could easily see them go potentially wide receiver or trade down maybe for a tight end. But I think there's a reason why they wanted to move up a couple spots, and I think they want to get an edge rusher before the best ones are gone.
Yeah, so I went in a different direction, obviously, because I already have him gone. I went with Devon Witherspoon, who you had go 7 to the Raiders. And I think that that's an area of need for them as well. What are your thoughts about that pick?
I like that you have him in your top 13. I think he's a very good player. They could go that direction. There's a lot of things they can do. I think they have a lot of needs. They could go wide receiver here too and draft one of the other guys a little bit earlier than people thought, but it would be kind of ironic if they went offense now that Aaron Rodgers is gone. So that would be kind of funny. But they typically go defense in the first round. So corner is not a bad pick at all, especially someone of that caliber, someone who I highly regard in this draft. So I think that's pretty solid.
So I think that we have a lot of the same top 13, except for you have two additional quarterbacks. But moving on to 14, I believe you have a.
Well, I wanted to trade. I wanted the Patriots to trade down. They seem to do it most years. But this year, I just couldn't figure out who it would be. And I had a really hard time with who they would pick. I have them going Nolan Smith. He's an edge. We've talked about him before because he's already gone on your list. He's a pretty good edge. He also sets an edge on run plays. Patriots value players who are more well rounded rather than a specialist all the time. So I could see them going edge. Can also see them going offensive tackle or corner. Those are probably three of their positions of need. There's talk about them potentially wanting a quarterback and move on from Mac Jones, but I don't see that actually working out. So I've just picked the best available player for them, Nolan Smith.
I see that. That's surprising because you've always been talking to me offline about the Patriots trading and how they like to trade in the first round.
I don't know where they would trade down to at this point.
So I have them taking the third best cornerback off of the board, Joey Porter Jr. I think that fulfills a need. It also shores up that defense a little bit, especially in the AFC East, where you're going to be going against Diggs and Tyreek and Waddle and Wilson. Like it's a lot to go through. So they do need people to cover them, and that's kind of why I went with the Joey Porter Jr. pick.
It's a good pick. I think they're definitely going to be looking at corner, and he very well could be on the board for them. Sometimes with the Patriots, they pick an odd player that you've never heard of, like a round or two early. So it could be something like that too. But I think Joey Porter is a great selection for them. At 15, there's just someone I can't help but keep sticking to the Jets, and I think they still probably get him at 15, and that's Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle out of Georgia. Now that you got Aaron Rodgers, you've got to shore up your offensive line. They've had a lot of health issues with some of their players, so getting an offensive tackle to keep your new quarterback, your $60 million quarterback, upright is probably a smart bet. Jeff, what do you feel about that?
I have the same Broderick Jones for the Jets there. And if you had them at 13 taking him and he jumps down to 15 and they take him, that's kind of a win for the Jets because they do save a little bit of money between the cap slot.
Yep.
So that's like a talked about win there if they get the same player that they were aiming for at 15 that they would have gotten at 13.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great spot for him.
So, what direction did you have the Commanders going?
I have the Commanders taking Joey Porter, the corner out of Penn State. So I think we're about the same range with Joey Porter. You had him 14. I have him 16.
Hmm.
So I think he's really good. He is arguably one of the top three, top two corners, depending on how you view your chart. But I really like him. I think they need someone there. They could go other routes, but this just makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I also have them going corner, but I obviously cannot go Joey Porter Jr. because he's already been selected by the Patriots. So I have Deontay Banks from Maryland going there.
He is a very, very good corner as well. And there's a lot of guys later who are screaming at you because now their team's not going to draft him.
Yeah, and I think there's a run on corners in the first round here, and I think that's number 4 on my board, and I think that's is that number 3 that's one on yours?
It's three.
But yeah, so I just think that there's going to be a run on corners, and we're just halfway through the first round, and I have 4 and you have 3 going. That's like a pretty big run in corners.
Yep. I definitely think that defensive back goes fairly early. Next at 17, it's the Steelers slot, but I have the Bears picking as part of that trade where the Steelers traded up to 9 to get Paris Johnson. Now I have the Bears taking someone who they've been rumored to be very interested in and might take at 9 anyway if they can't trade down, and that is Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle out of Tennessee. There's been a lot more buzz about him this last week or so. Teams are really starting to see that he performed very well in the SEC against someone like Will Anderson as well. I think he's a very complete tackle. I like him a lot. And the Bears are thrilled to have traded down and still get a very good offensive tackle to shore up that line for Justin Fields.
So, what do you think the difference in talent between Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright is?
I think realistically, it's very little.
Okay.
I think Paris Johnson's flashier, he's smoother, but I think Darnell Wright is a little bit more physical. He needs a little bit more polish, but he's very good, very well rounded. I guess pun intended because he's an offensive lineman, but I think teams really like him a lot. So him going at 17 is very good for the Bears.
So at number 17, I have the Steelers picking, and I have them taking Kalijah Cansey from Pittsburgh. So he stays local, kind of like Kenny Pickett last year, but kind of fits a need. They love their defensive players. What are your thoughts on my selection there?
Well, Pittsburgh loves their trenches, so they have desperate need at their offensive line and their defensive line. Those are their two primary concerns, and then corner is probably their third concern. So it could be any of those positions. Cansey's probably one of the top, if not the top, defensive tackle that's left on the board. So it makes total sense, and they've proven that they like to go local when they can. Him being a position of need, being the highest at that position at that time, and being local, it's a pretty good pick in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree there. I already have him gone. At 18, I have the Detroit Lions taking CJ Stroud.
He slides all the way down to 18, huh?
He does. He does. You have him going 6 to the same team. I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty interesting.
I think it's interesting we both are thinking Lions as a fit for CJ Stroud, probably for similar reasons with the way that Goff only has 2 years left on his contract. I think one of my comps for CJ Stroud, I think was Goff as well. I think he's a better talent. I think he's got some maturity potentially to do. I know after the supposed S2 score fail and his supposed interviews going poorly, I moved him down just a little bit, but I'm not unreasonable that he's still a good quarterback and I still like him. He could slide. I mean, there could quarterbacks could slide. I have the more optimist take on quarterbacks this year, and you have a more pessimistic take on these quarterbacks this year, which is totally fair, and probably the truth is somewhere in the middle there. So we'll see how that shakes out. Maybe if we did a cumulative average of our mocks, maybe it would turn out to be perfect. I don't know, but
We'll see sometime. But you have the Lions taking Stroud and Banks.
yeah. So I have, because they drafted quarterback early, I have them taking Deontay Banks, the cornerback out of Maryland. So yeah, if you were just pointing out that,
Yep, and
go
I
ahead.
have them taking Gonzalez and Stroud. So they get the better corner up higher, and then they still get Stroud down low. They're
Hey,
they're
that would be a steal for them if that's the way that it works out for them. That's very good for them.
There's a spot in this draft where absolutely cannot see quarterbacks going, or at least a team prioritizing taking a quarterback. And we're kind of in that area right now. So yeah, so this is kind of where we're at because we're at the better teams right now.
Okay. So what you're saying is the Bucks, who are right now starting Baker Mayfield, the Seahawks, the Chargers, no, I don't see a quarterback. The Ravens, if they can't work out a deal with Lamar Jackson, you can't see them taking a quarterback.
He's there long
The
term,
Vikings, who have 1 year left of Kirk Cousins, you can't see them taking a quarterback?
not this year.
You don't think so?
I can't see an 11. Well, they won 11 one-score games, so they probably won more games than that. I don't have the standings pulled up in front of me right now. But the Vikings, who won a lot of games last year, I can't see them using an asset for a quarterback right now. It
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. I hear what you're saying as far as, because we did talk about Trey Lance potentially going there. I just don't see them spending a first round asset on it, especially on a team that's going to win the division probably again this year, or at least have a really good shot at winning the division. So why wouldn't you get a player that helps you win the division this year versus worrying about 2024 right now? I guess that's the balance that goes on with a lot of these teams.
Yeah.
Coaches and GMs are coaching for the present. And I think we think 2, 3 years down the road, like with Anthony Richardson, if he has to sit for 2 years, that coach and that GM may not be part of that team anymore if it goes awry.
I mean, potentially, but I think they have to balance with this year and the future. Otherwise, they'll get fired either way if they focus on just one.
Right.
At number 19, we have the Bucks, and I have the best player on the board being Miles Murphy, the edge rusher out of Clemson. And a lot of people have him going much earlier. I don't know if he has that much actual buzz with NFL teams, but I don't see them going linebacker because they're not trading White. They are in the position to basically take anything. They're in the position to trade down. I just have them taking the best player on the board, Miles Murphy, edge rusher.
So speaking of linebacker, I think linebacker is just like a wasteland right now for this draft. So if they did decide to trade White, then they would get a king's ransom probably, just because of the sheer lack of talent on the board right now and out there.
Yeah.
I have them going offensive tackle, Darnell Wright, and I know that we've talked about him a little bit earlier because you have him going to the Bears, but I could see them going either way to shore up either side of their line. So right now, the Buccaneers are in a spot where it's not just a quarterback that they need to win, and that's probably why I don't see them going a quarterback at all in this draft, like at least early on, because they do need to start shoring up other parts of their offense because they did overspend during the Tom Brady era, and that cap that they've kicked down the road a little bit is now coming to be paid because now Brady's not on the roster anymore. You definitely can't keep kicking his can down the road. I still think that they could trade Mike Evans, not for cap reasons, but for actual money reasons. The owner might say that I'm done like shelling out all this money for a team that's not really going to compete. So they might ship Mike Evans off to a contender. I mean, that's one of the possibilities that I've been rattling around in my head. Shoring up both lines is going to be the quickest way to turn around a team. And you have them going defensive line, and I have them going offensive line. So we'll see which way they go with the draft there.
It's all about the trenches. And speaking of trenches, at number 20, I have the Seahawks Going defensive tackle with Kalijah Cansey out of Pittsburgh. It's someone you picked at 17 for the Steelers, and I have them going at 20, so we're within range of each other. And like I had them taking a quarterback earlier, so they hit one of their other needs at 20, their second first round pick.
Absolutely. And I had them take Jalen Carter earlier. So obviously that isn't as big of a need anymore. So I have them going offense here, and I actually have them taking Jordan Addison. The reason why I have them taking Jordan Addison is because I do see Tyler Lockett getting up there in age. Like, I do think he has 1 or 2 good years left in him, but they are going to start needing to look towards the future to replacing him. And Jordan Addison would be a asset to start replacing Lockett long term. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you have Jordan Addison going?
I like Jordan Addison. I don't know if they would go for a third wide receiver this early. I could even see them go tight end. I could see them go guard, interior line in general. I just think Tyler Lockett is immortal and he'll never get old. So there's no reason to draft someone, but I could easily see them take someone second, third round at wide receiver just to bring in that way. I actually have Jordan Addison at my next pick with number 21, the Chargers. I think there's been a lot of links with the Chargers going after another wide receiver. They don't have, in my opinion, as good of a combo as the Seahawks do with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They have Mike Williams, who's always a little bit banged up, and they have Keenan Allen, who's had his own injury issues, as well as he's getting a little bit older. And you can make the case that yes, Keenan Allen can play for another couple years, but similar to you trying to phase out Tyler Lockett, who is immortal, he's never gotten hurt in his life, as far as I know. No, I don't know, but I could see them going with a local California guy out of USC, Jordan Addison, and kind of making that offense with Herbert more potent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of why I have them going with tight end in Dalton Kincaid, the pass catching tight end. He would be an upgrade on Gerald Everett, would give Justin Herbert a good middle of the field presence over time here. And this could be a amazing combo for the next 10 years. But we will see if they actually go in the tight end direction or into the wide receiver direction that you think that they go in.
It certainly seems like it's probably going to be offense, but just educated guesses on our part.
Got to help Kellen Moore.
And I think we also have different picks here at number 22 with the Ravens.
Yep.
I have them taking Emmanuel Forbes, who is one of the corners that they're very interested in out of Mississippi State. They desperately need to revamp that secondary and rebuild their defense just a little bit. And they wanted to get a guy who is still of value before all of the top corners were gone. So I really like Emmanuel Forbes, cornerback out of Mississippi State for them.
Yeah, and I have them going offense. I have them going Zay Flowers, and I know that there's going to be a bunch of AFC teams that are going to want him, contending teams that are going to want him. And I have a feeling that Lamar had a wish list to come back. OBJ, Hopkins were on it. I don't think they'll be able to get Hopkins. I think they're going to have to look through the draft for an upgrade, and he's quite an upgrade. So that's the direction I'm going in, but I could see them going defense as well, because Harbaugh likes to go defense in the draft.
I think Zay Flowers would be a good pick for them ultimately. He can be moved all over the field. I think OBJ might play a little bit out of the slot more, and Zay Flowers might be outside, but they could easily switch between OBJ, Flowers, Bateman. I think that gives you a good trio, and then you have Mark Andrews as the tight end. So I think that would be a very potent offense, assuming Lamar Jackson will actually play for them this year and throw to the wide receiver position.
So that'll be interesting to see which way they go. So number 23, you have something big happening here.
One of the teams that has been most linked with a certain running back, the Atlanta Falcons, trade up to the Vikings spot. The Vikings have limited draft picks this year, and want to move down a little bit more, in my opinion, to have more picks to retool their defense rather than just the one at 23, especially since the top corners are all gone. So they want to move down and take a corner in the second round at better value. So it's something that makes sense to me. Falcons get to move up to take Bijan Robinson, who is out of Texas, the running back, the arguably the best running back in this entire class. I think that the coach Art Smith wants to make the Falcons into a better version of the Tennessee Titans offense that he coached a few years back, and that involves someone like a Derrick Henry. So they need a really good running back and maybe even a 1-2 punch, since they already have a running back that did fairly well last year on roster. So it's something that I like to have these interesting trades happen. So I really like that section. And he gets to jump the Jaguars, Giants, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals, Saints, Eagles. All of those teams could potentially be interested in a Bijan. So it was a opportune time for them to move up.
So it's really funny that you mentioned Bijan because at number 23, I have the Vikings taking Bijan Robinson, and this signifies the end of the Delvin Cook era.
So same player at the same spot, but we have different teams. I have a trade up, and you have them staying there and kind of reliving their Adrian Peterson glory days by taking a first round running back.
And I think having Bijan and having Justin Jefferson may help a transition period for a new quarterback that comes into that slot. If
Like
if
maybe a Trey Lance after the draft's over.
Yeah, if they move on from Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins really improved last year overall. Like he won 11 one-score games. He won 11 one-score games.
Also crumbled in primetime games, but
That's always been him, and that's why I think he'll never play for a West Coast team.
unless it's Shanahan, and Shanahan will make him look real good. Like, let's move on to pick number 24. And because I can't help myself, I have another trade here happening. I have the Jaguars, who were looking pretty at corner for a bit. All of a sudden, the run at corner goes, and now they want to move down. And the Chiefs want to take the last good first round wide receiver in Zay Flowers, wide receiver out of Boston College, who I think will remind them a lot of their glory days with Tyreek Hill. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Tyreek Hill was, but he is a more polished prospect coming into the league than Tyreek Hill. And it certainly didn't work out with Hardman with the Chiefs as well. So they need some. I know it's crazy saying they need something since they just won a Super Bowl, but to make their offense continue to pop and continue to innovate, continue to improve, to keep them ahead of the other guys in the AFC, they need to bring in a very dynamic wide receiver, and that's what I have them doing.
I have them keeping the pick at 24 and going with tight end Michael Mayer. And I believe that Doug Peterson likes to have two tight ends that he can rely on the roster. So I don't think this blocks an Ingram extension, especially with Lawrence being on a rookie deal. And I see them just really peppering him with weapons. I do think that adding Michael Mayer helps Travis Etienne run the football. I think that Lawrence is going to have every possibility to succeed this upcoming year with Michael Mayer. And I know you're down a little bit on tight ends in this draft, and I think that's because there's so many of them.
Yeah.
But
There's so many of them, and the teams that need them have already positioned themselves to previously draft one or sign one or trade for one. So I think it depresses the market. It's not that there aren't tight ends that would be worth a first round pick. It's will they be taken in the first round? And to me, the answer is no. But I can't fault the team for this at this point in the draft in the late twos taking a tight end. That's pretty decent value.
let's move on to number 25. Who do you have the Giants taking?
So the top three wide receivers are gone. They
Mm,
already traded for a tight end.
yep.
So they need to improve their offense somehow. And They apparently don't really have a good center. So I have them taking the best center in the draft, John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota, to really beef up and help that line, protect Daniel Jones, as well as help them in their run game. So I think it's a trenches kind of pick, and I think it's something that could help them, and they can take a potentially a wide receiver later in the draft.
So this is my first trade, and I have the New York Giants acquiring T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals, and Cincinnati selecting Quentin Johnston here. I know you're a little bit down on Quentin Johnston, but I do think playing the second fiddle to Jamar Chase may really help him with his development, and plus they won't need him that much with Tyler Boyd this year. First, what do you think about T. Higgins to New York? And then what do you think about the replacement for Higgins?
Well, I think T. Higgins becomes the best wide receiver on that roster as soon as he's traded there. So it would be a good get for the Giants. I think he's better than who's left in the wide receiver pool in the draft. It's a good move for the Giants. I'm down on Quentin Johnston. He's a athletic freak. He's very good. I just don't think he has it in him to be a good pass catcher. He didn't really wow me in college, but being the third receiver initially with the Bengals, they've had three really good wide receivers, so maybe they have a pretty good wide receiver coach who can help coach him up, help work out his flaws and make him a better wide receiver. If he can be 2/3 the receiver T. Higgins was, then it would potentially be worth it in the long run contractually, just because he has a 5-year contract as a first rounder. I mean, just getting him slant routes and having him get yards after the catch would be worth it as well. So if you could just get him on short passes and have him use his speed and size to get upfield, it could really help spread this offense out and stretch it out a little bit.
I would agree, and that would be exciting just to watch him have the space to become a better pass catcher. So 26, Dallas is on the clock. What do you have them doing?
So Dallas is one of those picks that I'm not quite sure what they will end up doing. There's a bunch of different guys that I thought about, and what I ended up with was they need interior defensive linemen. So I have them going Brian Bryce, the defensive lineman out of Clemson. I think he's very underrated. He might end up going this low. He might end up going top of the second, but I think he is a better value than people think. I have them going defensive lineman at this spot. I know they can probably go linebacker, wide receiver, running back, offensive lineman. They can basically do anything at this point. Jeff, what do you have them doing?
I also have them going with Brian Brees here.
You just copying me,
I
man. That's all it
did.
is.
I did. I did. We're going to have some similar picks here down the stretch, and I think in different areas, but we're going to have some similar picks. But this one's an exact match. 27 to the Bills. Who do you got there?
So I have them going Jack Campbell. I know they really need a linebacker. They just let two go. He's a really good thumper, a really good downhill runner. He's probably the best linebacker in this class, in my opinion. And he's there for the taking for the Bills at 27.
All right. At 27, I have the Buffalo Bills selecting Brian Branch, safety from Alabama. Kind of fits a need and helps shore up that back end of the Bills defense, which had some troubles last year.
He's kind of like Reed, where he can move around to safety, slot. Like he can play a little bit of corner as well. So he's a really good utility guy that can you put him wherever you need him.
Yeah. So I kind of like the Bills going defense. I don't know if a linebacker goes in the first round this year, though. I think that's kind of where I'm at. So at number 28, what do you have the Bengals doing?
So I have the Bengals taking Brian Branch. So I'm a pick off from you. I think safety and corner are positions of need for the Bengals. Pure corners are mostly gone at this point. I think the rest probably go in the second round. So he's the only first round value roughly that's left. So I think that's a good pick for them. They definitely need to work on their defense. And it seems to me that they're keeping Jonah Williams, so they probably won't go more offensive line at this point.
All right. So I have them going cornerback, and I have them going in the direction of Cam Smith from South Carolina. Is that a bit of a reach, or what do you think about Cam Smith?
I mean, I think he's in contention. If he's not going to go in the first round, he's probably going to go high in the second. So it's not out of the question. Bengals could even trade down for all we know and still take Cam Smith, the exact same guy that you picked for them, pretty quickly in the second round. So it's by no means out of the realm of possibility and might even be likely. And Cam Smith, someone who might go as high as like the Ravens or the Vikings at 22 or 23. So not a bad pick at all.
So at number 29, what do you have the Saints doing?
I have them going defensive tackle, Mozzie Smith. I think he's someone that they really like. I was also considering an edge rusher as well for the Saints because I heard that they might be interested in that position too. Jeff, what do you have going for the Saints right here at 29?
So I also have them going Mozzie Smith here. So I know they like their defensive linemen, and it just seems like they keep cycling through them. So it just seems like another one that they're going to cycle through.
If we agree, it must happen. So
Yes, the
that's
stars
how I
are
view it.
aligning. Number 30, what do you have the Eagles doing with the 30th pick?
Again, I can't help myself. So I have the Eagles trading out of this pick and the Titans trading up to take the fifth quarterback of the first round, and that is Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. So I think they will want him to sit a year behind Tannehill and then end up taking over because they've given up on Malik Willis, most likely.
That is interesting. 5 quarterbacks in the first round. Has that ever happened before?
I think so. Yes.
Okay. That's a lot. You're saying about 1/6 of the picks are going to be quarterbacks.
Yep. I know it's on average 2 or 3 a year is the typical average, but
And
I
it,
just think the way that the contracts are structured and the number of teams that need a quarterback and or a good quarterback to sit behind someone who's not going to be there after a year or two is pretty high. So I can see it happen. I know there's some crazy people that think Hooker is going at 12 to the Texans, and that's just not going to happen, Peter King. I'm talking about you. But I think somebody does. I think there's going to be five. I think somebody takes Hooker at the end of the first just for the 5th year contract, the 5th year option.
so, admittedly, this isn't that great of a quarterback draft. Like, it's better than last year, but it's still not like a great quarterback draft, and we have to keep that in mind when we're doing this draft here. I only have 3 quarterbacks going in the first round. The other thing is next year is going to be a much better quarterback draft, but also this time last year, Geno Smith, Drew Lock on the Seahawks roster. What have you told me that they needed to draft a quarterback last year?
Yep. I think Geno Smith surprised everyone with that.
And I think there'll be more surprises this year as there always is
There
every
very
year.
well could be.
Yep.
Very well could be.
So at number 30, I let the Eagles keep the pick and they went Emmanuel Forbes, another cornerback out of Mississippi State. What do you think about Emmanuel Forbes? Like this is like 8 corners.
I think it makes sense if he lasts that long. It certainly makes sense that they pick up another corner, especially since a lot of the defensive tackles are gone, and that's one of their main positions of need. So there's not someone there that fits the value. It could be a reason they could potentially trade down, but Forbes making it to them, I feel like they would have to jump on that. I could also see them going crazy and taking a running back for some reason at 30. They're in a position where they're very top heavy and they can take position of value as a backup to replace an older veteran. So they can do almost anything with that pick 30.
I was split between Forbes and Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jahmyr Gibbs was my other one that I was going to potentially select for them. But they may select a running back in the second, third, fourth rounds, and that's typically where the best running backs actually come out of the draft.
Yeah, I think second and third round is statistically where the best ones are.
Yeah.
Pick 31, which I have as the Jaguars as part of the trade with the Chiefs. I have them taking Will McDonald, the defensive end out of Iowa State. That could also very well be the Chiefs pick because I've heard that a lot. And Jeff, I think you did make that yours, so go ahead.
I did. So just to close the loop, Will McDonald is number 31 pick, the last pick,
The last pick of the first round.
the only round that matters.
Yeah. The last pick of our mock draft in the first round. So I think that's a pretty good draft. I like him, and I think a lot of teams like him, and it works for them. Works for the Chiefs. I think it would work for the Jaguars as well, since there's not a defensive back that I like for them. So I think those are two decent mocks. I think between the two of us, we probably got a lot of stuff right, probably a lot of stuff wrong. But I think between the two of us, we're more accurate than probably some of these other guys out there that say some crazy stuff like Hendon Hooker at 12. Any bold takes and predictions before we go, Jeff? I know I have 4 quarterbacks in the top 10. I think my prediction is going to be top 10 rather than just saying top 6. I think 5 quarterbacks go in the first. I think 0 tight ends go in the first. And I think Bijan does not go in the top 20.
I concur with the Bijan, but the other two seem to be a little suspect, and we will figure out who's right there. But I don't really think I have. Well, my bold pick is Anthony Richardson doesn't go in the first, so that's pretty.
I think that's crazy. But we have polar opposite opinions on Anthony Richardson. So that will be interesting to track to see how he does in his career and see who was right about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That wraps up our draft coverage. I can't believe it. 2 days, the draft.
Yep. From the point of filming, we are 2 days away. So we're filming this Tuesday. The draft will be, of course, Thursday, the first round, and we will do a follow up next week about who went where and potentially risers and fallers for rookies and veterans. So that's something we can talk about following that draft. That does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for downloading or listening to this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.